Can you
Hey
hear me?
everybody, we are still working on our jingle game. We are, 3 weeks in, 4 weeks into the new year. I'm Gabriel Correjo. I'm joined by Micah Smith as usual, and we thank you for joining the show. But
That
Michael,
didn't work
Micah,
at all. The
it's not
goal was
working.
to have an intro that we could play the jingle to, and didn't work. Sorry.
We're going to do jingle roulette. So just randomly find a royalty-free track and then just pump it in. But best laid plans. Obviously, we're still working out the kinks. All right. But thank you, everybody. I hope everybody's having a fantastic Friday. We're super excited. Our main man, Mark G from the COE. That's, by the way, the new boy band, I think, Micah. Mark G and the COE. What do you think?
That sounds great.
Mark, what's going on, dude?
I'm doing fantastic. Off to a quick start in 2024, but lots of excitement. So excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for making time. I know you're super busy, and we're going to talk about why that is so. But before we get started, so we're talking about the new year and the new year, new me. Any resolutions, Mark? Did you have any New Year's resolutions?
Man, I'm not a big New Year's resolution guy. I tend to like reset those things throughout the year whenever I feel like I need a reset. So I'm not a big New Year's resolution guy. I'm sorry to disappoint, but yeah.
No, it's good. I feel that, you've got like sort of short-term goals. You've got, dynamic situations that require, malleability, right?
He
Exactly.
reevaluates his resolutions every time Huberman puts out a new video.
I do.
What about you, Micah? Do you have any? Are you a
No, when
resolution guy?
you're already a super refined Italian sports car of a human being, you don't have to do resolutions,
Like I was thinking like humility would be a good one for you, Michael. Like, yeah.
I'm the best on this call at being humble, no doubt. I'm probably the best in the world at being humble.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that. Folks that have joined and are continue to join, I'm watching these numbers just crank up, which is awesome. This is an exciting conversation. We like to call it drinking our own champagne. We are consumers of our own product. Mark, as I mentioned, runs our COE and is instrumental in helping all of us here at Automation Anywhere put AI to work with the Automation Success Platform. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about, I know there's a lot of conversation around, people sort of, tiptoeing into the generative AI application world for a number of really good reasons, strong reasons, and we'll address those. But we have been able to dive right in and innovate and change the way we work in a great way. Myself, I've mentioned it before, but working on some really interesting products for marketing, automations for marketing powered by generative AI. As well as some other things. And so we're going to dive into that today with Mark. But the point is, if you're wondering how to start, where to start, we're going to go over those things. But if you have a specific question on the topic, raise your hand. This is meant to be an interactive conversation. And Micah will answer the question the best, clearly, as he just said.
And then I'll let Mark come in.
And then we'll let our guest talk, but just a little bit.
Then I'll correct the answer. Yeah.
So let's make this interactive and fun. I hope we have a good show. All right, hope. What am I saying? We've got the best in the business
We
here.
will.
Again, there's no plan, or hope is not a plan, as my former CEO used to tell me. All right, let's get down to it. Mark, you guys, as I mentioned, have been extremely busy. You guys have been helping me, helping everyone across the company. You're going out to help customers now based on what you've learned. But give the audience some color. What have you been working on? What's the COE and the team been up to?
So I guess the first thing is, we're customer zero for the platform, which basically means that we want to experience the latest and greatest of the platform before our customers do. And the reason we do that is obviously to make sure that things are working and honed and well understood, in the hopes that we can kind of lead the way and demonstrate its best use. So that itself has been busy because for those of you that were part of the last Imagine event, the product keynote, my own head spun around. I couldn't believe all the new announcements and things that are coming. Generative AI basically getting infused into every part of the platform. So that piece itself has been busy, and I'm really excited, Gabe, just about all the automations with generative AI that are coming to fruition. So we actually just hit number 20 not long ago. Automations with generative AI that we use in production here within Automation Anywhere. So I'm super just proud of that. We had our own journey just to get to that point, but these use cases are genuinely high value, exciting, and generative AI with automation together are making it happen.
I'm super excited for us to jump into some of those. But Mark, I know you're familiar with the Pathfinder program, and one of the things that we always chastise people on is we don't talk about the impact of our program by number of automations. So brass tacks, let's talk about the real metrics that are being
I was going to throw it's football season here. It's playoff time. My Niners are on the way to the championship. I was going to throw a flag on that play because even I know, Mark, that we don't measure success by the number of automations we deliver.
No, we don't. What I really wanted to say is we've delivered 3,000 lines of code.
Even better.
Much better.
Exactly. So we did a really interesting assessment. Now that we've delivered 20 automations with generative AI, we were able to do a pretty cool piece of kind of before and after analysis, or kind of compare and contrast. So our automation program had been up and running for around 4 years before generative AI hit us. Then we had these 20 automations with generative AI more recently. So we crunched the numbers and started to look at what was the ROI looking like for the use cases we delivered pre-Gen AI, and how did that change. Long story short, we came up with around triple the ROI for these generative AI use cases from what we saw before. So as an example, if we were seeing, say, between 2 and 3x ROI before generative AI, these automations with generative AI were more like 9 or 10x. Again, we can get into details. We've got some that are a lot more than 9 or 10x as well. That's just on average. So that was a really interesting finding. Is it kind of confirmed what we already believed would be true, that genuinely the potential for automation with adding generative AI in means that the ROI is a lot more than ever was possible before.
And all the joking aside, I mean, the way that you just described that and the evaluation that you and your team have done, I think is a really good way for other people to be thinking about this, right? If we're going to, let's say, take on a specific use case or prioritize this one opportunity, we need to look at it to see, based on our investment, how much is the organization actually saving here? And
Yes.
You've taken that a step further to say, hey, you know what, based on kind of the cadence of the types of opportunities we've been taking on both pre and post
Yes.
generative AI, we're seeing a huge bump here. And I think that's a really good way to be able to really talk about the impact of these new automation opportunities.
I agreed, Micah. And one thing I want to emphasize here is, it's kind of the beauty of ROI is you've got both sides of the equation. I think one thing that's being missed sometimes is it's not just that these use cases combining automation and generative AI can produce a lot of value. I mean, that's certainly true. The other side of ROI is the cost. And that's where genuinely the cost, we can talk about the effort, or the time to value is much shorter for these use cases as well. So for example, some of these use cases that we're delivering now, you could imagine them potentially happening in a non-generative AI world. But again, it would take 3 or 4 times as long. So that the time to value is really short, and then you also get lots of value. That's how you get a great ROI number.
There's like a whole multiplier. Speaking of this idea of value, we're talking about like the 10% impact or savings, saving IT budget. 10% is a big number, but compared to say 90% or something, it might be considered smaller. But when you put it in the context of an enterprise IT budget, that's significant. But Um, when we talk about IT budgets, there's this thing we had talked to Sumit about recently too, which was this concept of, build versus buy.
Yes.
And you were just talking about the speed to value. So can we just talk to us a little bit about the decision making in terms of building
Yep.
versus buying?
Yeah. So, I think within our organization, we're, out of necessity, we're a lean organization. We want to be efficient. We want to be lean. And basically, we already had a bit of a discipline around if we, for example, we're going to procure a new piece of software, or there's a request for a bunch of new licenses, as an example. We already had that discipline in place of thinking about, is this the right thing to do? All those good procurement practices, what are the available options, and making sure we pick the best option. I think what's changed here with generative AI is we're seeing that like many of the pieces of software that we would typically procure, like we could genuinely and in not a ridiculous amount of time build something that's maybe not 100% equivalent, Gabe, but what if we can do 60 or 70%? What if we can do all of kind of the must-have functionality of that application? All of a sudden we've got build options on the table instead of buying that were really never options before. So that's one of the beauty of what we're seeing here. We're seeing this idea of being able to displace applications with automations powered by generative AI.
One of the things that I think makes that possible is usually when we're looking at a particular platform, like I want to buy platform XYZ, I'm not buying it for every single feature that platform has to offer. I'm buying it for like two or three key things that I want to be able to do. And so I think that's what's enabling what you're doing, right?
100%, 100%. And again, without getting too much in the weeds of this, when we talk about the cost for these kind of solutions, we can talk about the initial acquisition cost. How much does the software, for example, cost to buy? We also need to talk about ongoing maintenance, whether that's licensing or other types of maintenance. Another one of the nice things about these automations with generative AI is the maintainability aspect. So Mike, I know you're deep in terms of your knowledge of development, because a lot of the brains of these automations are the generative AI component. You make these prompts configurable, and all of a sudden you've got a really, really configurable solution. If some of the requirements change tomorrow, it's not necessarily a bunch of changes to hard-coded business rules. It's we need an upgraded prompt, and again, very, very quickly we've made that update. So I think that's sometimes getting lost, but that's another benefit of these automations with generative AI.
I like that.
That malleability that goes back to your non-resolution New Year. I think it's awesome. I think you bring up a great point too, Micah, which is this idea of the core functionality, like of say a platform you're going to get. It has a lot of bells and whistles, but really you fundamentally, the critical pieces are 2 to 3 things, right? It's like me and my stereo. My stereo does like all these things. I just like turn it on, turn up the volume, maybe switch channels for input, and I'm good.
Right.
But I'm not, I'm a simpleton, so there's that too. But given 20 AI powered or generative AI powered intelligent automations, but you got crazy people like me coming to you in the team saying, "Hey, I've got this great idea for this thing." How do you prioritize? How do you get started? Where do you start?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, and again, some of this might seem obvious, but maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I think the first big challenge for us, at least in our own experience, was just understanding what it is. So generative AI doesn't do everything, but it does some things very, very well. So kind of what is it? Getting your arms around the technology and understanding here are its base capabilities and really kind of its sweet spot in terms of its strengths. So we wanted to understand that initially, and then what that does is now all of a sudden you've got an additional, choose your analogy. You've got an additional tool in your toolkit, arrow in your quiver, however you want to say it, but you've got an additional tool at the table. What that means now, Gabe, is if crazy Gabe comes with his requirement, as you're talking, we can now be thinking, is there a generative AI angle that's going to help us here? And of course, we're finding that in many, many cases, the answer is yes. The basic calculus, though, in terms of prioritization hasn't changed. Of course, we want to be focusing on ultimately low-hanging fruit, kind of quick win mentality all the time. So we're always thinking about how much value could we get out of this idea, and what's it gonna take in terms of effort to deploy it. That's the approach we've taken. Again, it's kind of an ROI based decision. That's still our guiding principle in terms of how we prioritize automations.
Sound fundamentals always apply, right?
Yep. Yes.
New
Mark,
technologies will enter the field, but
Right.
if you have the sound principles, then you can leverage the new tech.
Yes, exactly.
I like that approach, and I think that that totally makes sense. I want to talk about some of the practical use cases that your team
Yep.
started with, because I think that's why everyone's
Sure.
here, right? We want to hear about like what are the actual things you guys built, and
Sure.
what were some of your first things that you pushed out, and what were the lessons learned there?
Sure. One question that's kind of related, Micah, can be, where do these ideas come from? I can tell you that you guys will remember this. One of our executives launched something we call Demo Royale, which was kind of a cross-company competition. Once we started to understand what generative AI was, we had a fun competition to come up with the coolest kind of automation with generative AI use cases. And let me start off with, some of those ideas ended up being winners that we implemented internally. So in terms of coming up with ideas, I think that was real helpful. But some of the first use cases we focused on, one of them ended up having phenomenal ROI right out of the gate. We called it Caption Cruncher. I've probably discussed this on some prior calls, but this was around the area of globalization and localization. Essentially, we had a whole bunch of media videos that we wanted to make available in different languages. We were essentially paying service providers to help with a lot of that work, which wasn't scaling for us super well. And so we were able to avoid a lot of the cost and have some significant savings by providing an automation with generative AI solution that basically took all of those videos that were all in English. That could have been your videos, Micah, for example, all in English, English subtitles, and all of a sudden we could crank out all those videos in 6, 7, 8 languages. And so you end up with a really, really scalable solution to handle that problem. Another big one was in the area of supplier responses. So our AP team recognized very quickly, hey, we're getting a ton of requests from suppliers. We'd like to be focused on other things. Instead, we end up generating a bunch of responses to these supplier requests. Is that something we could automate with generative AI? So the spark there was, hey, these requests that are coming in, they're unstructured. So back to the point about understanding what you're dealing with from a technology standpoint, we all had in our head, hey, this technology plays really well with unstructured data. Emails are unstructured. And that's exactly how this team were getting all those requests. It ended up being a perfect solution with automation and generative AI, just having the supplier requests come in, using generative AI to classify them to say, this is this type of request. In this case, the supplier wants an update on when they're going to get paid for this invoice. In another situation, they're asking for an update to bank information. And guess what you can do once you classify those requests? In many cases, you can automatically respond to the supplier. And then,
Mark,
I think sorry, go ahead.
Well, I want to touch on that last one because I think you said something really important there that I think a lot of people may miss. You were automating a process, not a task.
Mm-hmm.
And I would differentiate that to say that you were looking at what's the intake of this, what's my input, and then what's my ultimate goal on the other side. Within that, there are multiple automations that your team is leveraging to make that process work. You also have like kind of a workflow or process flow that's built into that, where you're able to use Copilot to enable different people within the AP team or whoever needs to be referenced to be able to visually validate, correct, and perfect anything that's coming in. Can you talk a little bit about that process and how we're using that to reinform a better process going forward?
No, that's awesome, Micah, and super, super important. So one thing I think, again, that we didn't realize on day one of generative AI hitting us was we didn't realize how beautifully our Copilot offering and generative AI would play together. But when we talk about these generative AI solutions and intelligent automation with generative AI, a common discussion point is, can I trust the output? Do I need a human in the loop? So in this case, we found that yes, there were genuinely some paths through the process where we felt confident automatically responding to the supplier. There were other situations where no, there's some kind of exception. For example, maybe the sentiment has changed. We've got a supplier that's not very happy. And we wanted the ability to route to a human, route it to our accounts payable team. Copilot ended up being perfect for that, because guess how that accounts payable team wants to receive those requests in as frictionless and easy a process as possible. So what we were able to do was, in those situations where we needed to involve the accounts payable team, route it to them directly in the systems that they use. In our ecosystem, we use Workday Financials, we use Microsoft Teams as our collaborative platform. We were able to serve up those exception scenarios, whether it's an upset supplier or some kind of different ad hoc request, serve it up to them directly in those business systems, even propose a response to the request using generative AI. All they've got to do is make any minor edits and click a button, and off it goes. So a lot of the friction around the end-to-end process, Micah, was completely removed. And it's a wonderful example of the technology working alongside humans to make the end-to-end process work in all scenarios.
And the outcome too, like obviously there's process efficiency and all those things, but ultimately we've got happier suppliers and customers, right?
Yep. Yes. Yes. I mean, if you think about it, much quicker responses to them, for example. Yes, absolutely.
And I want to remind the audience, I see a couple familiar faces out there. Raise your hand, join us in the conversation if you've got questions. I would love to hear from you all. What use cases you might be working on, what you're considering even, and if you want maybe some advice even on how to take that idea, that concept, and maybe put it into action. We can do that, but I want to go back to really quick to this idea of the priority. Like we talk about it probably a lot, but maybe not enough at the same time, which is this idea of like the low-hanging fruit. But I feel like the idea of low-hanging fruit could connotate it's simple and it's sort of low value, but it's simple and we can get it done.
Right.
Is that the case, generally speaking?
I love that point, and Micah and I have had lots of discussions about this. But this expression "quick win," it's got two words to it: quick. So that refers to it's low on the effort side. The time to value is short. That's true. But the second word's important too. It's a win, which doesn't mean I very quickly delivered something with no value. That means I was able to very quickly deliver something that's actually a win, which means there's substantial value. So again, in the first use cases that we delivered, ones like I just mentioned, what we called Caption Cruncher for the localization, globalization angle, and this one for our AP team, the value was substantial, but those automations were delivered in 6 to 8 weeks. And keep in mind, we were at the beginning of the curve. I'm not saying it would take that long even now, but delivering those in a couple months based on the value that came out the other end was phenomenal. They were absolutely quick wins, but to your point, they were definitely not low value.
Mark,
That's
one
awesome.
other consideration for your quick win, obviously we've talked about before, is risk, right?
Yeah.
The risk of either not doing this, the risk of ending up on the front page of a newspaper or a blog post or something like that. How does that factor into your low-hanging fruit calculations?
No, it's a really good point, Micah. So I think right out of the gate, to be blunt, we avoided some of the use cases that involved really, really sensitive data. We're not at that point anymore. Now we understand enough and are doing use cases in areas like legal, for example, that, to be honest, we wouldn't have touched with a 10-foot pole on day one. Now we feel comfortable doing that. So right from the get-go, these use cases that we were dealing with, we thought, from a risk angle, basically, what's the worst thing that can happen? And we put in some guardrails to mitigate those risks, but we just didn't touch those kind of really, really sensitive processes that we thought could be higher risk, Micah. Again, now we're a little bit more mature, and now we would be we'd be more open to jumping into those areas.
And I want to get into this maturity curve, but we've got a few people out raising their hands and excited to hear what they've got to say. So let's, can we bring in, is it Bisham? And there's Bisham, and Bisham, you're on mute. Oh, looks like he just dropped.
It's that page refresh as soon as you get on stage really will stick you.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to looks like Bisham's back. Can we try one more time?
There we go.
There he is. Bisham, can you hear us? It looks like you're on mute, Bisham. We know what we need in this LinkedIn audio function. I'm going to talk to LinkedIn. The ability to unmute people.
Yeah,
Can you
I did unmute now.
There
Sorry.
he
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
There he is.
Hi. Hey, thanks for the opportunity. So I had a question. I don't know if you guys have done this, but what's the uh, marriage of the RPA and the AI? Like, have you done that, and how well does that work? And if there are challenges with that?
Yeah. Nice to meet you, first of all. All of the use cases that we're talking about today are exactly the marriage that you're talking about. So all of these automations that we're talking about today are automation, but using generative AI as well. So yeah, everything we're discussing here, all those use cases I've gone through and that we'll talk about are that marriage. And I think, how has it worked? I think that's been really, really positive. So we found that a whole bunch of new use cases that we wouldn't have attacked before, now we can attack with the introduction of generative AI. And even prior automations, we're revisiting them because we had some prior automations, for example, that had lots of business logic that was kind of manually coded in. Now generative AI can do that very, very simply. Or there were some steps that were still manual and going to humans, and now we're able to automate more of that using generative AI. So we've absolutely found that marriage is kind of natural and even more powerful than we thought on day one. It's proving to be very, very powerful.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
awesome.
an easy use case for everyone to revisit is like when you look at the .30 release or even .31 and the capabilities of document automation with Gen AI, that is an absolute home run. If you were previously using IQBot or you're using document automation, but you're not using the generative AI capabilities, you may explore that as almost like a second approach to being able to accomplish your extraction. I mean, a first approach if it's an unstructured document, but even on a structured or semi-structured document, if you say, well, I'm not getting straight through processing on as many as I might like, my first approach may be the traditional way of trying to extract the data based on these key value pairs and finding relative data on the form. My next approach is where I might take that generative AI lever and start to say, basically ask a question of this document and get a response that way. The testing that I've done so far has been crazy impressive for how well it's able to return a lot of this content and then format it for me as well.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's super cool. And with .31, they've got the new semi-structured capabilities as well, right? For like invoices and stuff.
Yeah, table extraction.
Yeah, we'll put that in the chat too. That just released. So definitely check that out. Let's bring in Ed. Ed, are you out there? Sorry for the lag, people. It's not us, it's the tech.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey, Ed, how's it going?
Hey, Gabriel. Very well. Thank you, guys. This is a great topic, so appreciate it. So I'm working on a use case, and Mark, you're starting to hit on and getting me excited.
Awesome.
The use of Gen AI as a rules engine is something I've been really spinning my wheels on and trying to think about. So I'm curious. I kind of get the sentiment analysis concept and getting back, I guess, typically a threshold number, right? Trying to indicate certain emotions. But I'm wondering about, have you used Gen AI to actually get back kind of next best action for RPA to take?
Yes.
And how that mapping might work?
Yeah, nice to meet you, Ed, and it's a great question. I think the example I just gave of the AP scenario where different supplier requests are coming in is a good example of that. So essentially, in a case like that, the first thing generative AI is helping you with is the classification. So the message is unstructured. So what the heck is this? What is this request? And then in terms of the next action, either the next action is run this automation. We can just automate and close out the request, or we need to route it to a human. So I think that's one example of what you're talking about, where generative AI is helping understand what is it, like what is the request, and based on what it is, here's the next thing to do, whether that's going to be a manual human action or an automation. The other thing that we've been exploring, we're on the front end of this, but the early results are really, really positive, is some of these business processes that are really heavy on rules. Anyone that's interacted with the tax world will know that. I mean, the tax world is full of rules. Things like imagine audit processes for things like expense reporting, right? What does that look like? Essentially, there's a bunch of rules that apply to expense reports. So if you were able to load up in an LLM, if you were able to have a trained model that understood what your policies were, could you hand an expense report to it and say, is this in compliance or not? So that kind of thing. So to your point, the idea of using generative AI as a rules engine. Our kind of POCing testing has given us a lot of optimism, but that's something that we're working pretty heavily, again, in areas like tax and also even expense reporting.
That's cool. With regards to, he mentioned next best action. We have some functionality too for with automation copilot for automators too, right? Where when you're actually developing the automation, it's also recommending that as well.
Absolutely, it's really powerful for someone developing an automation. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, cool. We got a lot of hands up, guys. Let's bring in Matt.
Did I unmute successfully? Did I manage?
Yeah, you did. You're probably the fastest unmuter there is. I think we need to give you like a badge.
The badge is
I
on the way.
avoided refresh buttons or anything. Okay. Anyway, there was a person a couple of questions ago. I wanted to provide again, my version of the answer. Some of the discovery work we've been doing around generative AI and how it fits into work streams has forced us to really drill down on what individual pieces of work we're actually doing. I think you take a lot for granted when you're a human, and reading an email just happens. You just do it. And so we've looked at breaking our business processes down into tasks and being very detailed on what we're talking about in those tasks. An example being that email thing you're referring to, opening an email and reading it. What are you actually doing when you're reading it? You are looking for a collection of inputs and details that provide you direction on what next step to take. And if there's entities in there you're trying to extract, or specific instructions you're trying to extract from specific parts of the email, from like the subject, from the sender, etc., all of those things come naturally to a human, and we kind of forget about the fact that that's what we're doing. If you can identify all of those steps and then look at the matrix out there that people like OpenAI and Microsoft have put out about the features of generative AI, you can start to line them up pretty well. There's entity extraction, summarization, etc. And you can start pulling in all those pieces to replace those individual pieces of your task. And then to using Copilot, to Micah's point, the parts that you can't do with the generative AI, you leave for the human, and the parts you can do with the generative AI, you plug it in, and you can just have back and forth human interaction with the tool. The part that I wanted to bring up was around testing. So I work at a bank, and we're not really able to put anything into production yet until we prove everything works perfectly, which is obviously not very easy with generative AI. For some of the things like entity extraction, classification, sentiment analysis, we're using tried and true frameworks, traditional machine learning frameworks, where it's a very determined outcome. There's a happy call label, or it's you're pulling out a specific entity. So we're able to use those old frameworks. But for generating content or for summarization, we're having trouble getting all of the things that we need from the tools we're using, as well as the information to make testing work successfully. And I was wondering if you guys had any feedback on that.
Micah, do you want to swing at that first?
Yeah, toss that one to me, right? No, I think the way that I think about it is obviously I'm going to look at how much I can trust some of these capabilities before I put it into production, which is obviously what you're saying. But I want to like basically ease my way into this. And so if Copilot is my backstop for a lot of these capabilities and getting a human involved, there might be certain use cases where I say, yep, we can automate that one 100%. We can trust it. This is a tried and true, tested pathway for getting an automation to run successfully end to end. There might be other cases where if I don't have a high confidence or it's not one of the key scenarios that we've tested against or seen, I will err on the side of sending those to users. The other thing I'm going to do in that entire process is keep track of what was my generative AI automation / approach, and then what was the ultimate decision that was made by a user or a human. Because I want to see like, all right, we erred on the side of sending to a human, but should we have done that? And were we actually correct with our automated decision making? And I'm going to keep measuring those almost like a double blind keying type approach so that I can see how often we were accurate. And ideally, we should start to see that we're making improvements in these certain areas. The other thing that, and I don't know if how much Mark has done this, well, he probably has. When you start to think about making multiple layers or multiple levels of decision, I might want to start to think about different actors or different agents who are a part of my process who can help me to refine a decision even further. And so that means I might have one step where I have a prompt where I'm just trying to understand, like Matt mentioned, some of the entities, some of the key players, some of that information. But then I might have a secondary agent who's going to review that for a totally different purpose. And that enables me to keep my prompts a bit simple, split them out, and then also have like, it's almost like a second set of eyes on a lot of this stuff. Mark, what can you add to that?
Yeah, completely agree. We have some situations like that where essentially we've got one model supervising another one. We do have some situations like that. Agree with everything you just said, Micah. The other thing I would say is it's really, really critical as part of your design that you ground properly. So it's really, really important that generative AI knows this is your function as part of this use case. This is your persona. This is how you're to act. These are the types of questions you're to respond to. These are the ones you're not to respond to, and then it's grounded with the right data. So generative AI basically needs to know to stay in its lane. Again, that's a really, really important thing to make sure that you don't introduce risk of generative AI kind of going haywire and doing things it was never intended to in the context of that use case. At the end of the day, from a standpoint of how we built these automations, I always treat the generative AI piece as its own functional module. So it on its own, we look at what model and vendor are we going to use. We work on the prompt engineering piece of it. We test the heck out of it just on its own as an isolated piece of functionality. And then later on, it gets plugged into an automation. And that's definitely a recommended best practice from my standpoint, rather than getting in the middle of building an automation using our technology and then getting lost in prompting.
And that's something even I can speak to, like with the automations we're building right now from a content perspective, is having like, individual agents call the automation copilot for validation, but also have another prompt to help validate it even before it gets to me, to say, is this outline okay for, whatever email I want to draft or whatever it is. And so by simplifying those prompts individually, you get much better results more quickly.
I think the insane like next level of this is where you start to think about almost like an org chart of your digital assistants and how they interface with each other and how they provide checks and balances for each other, just like you would have an org chart or a team responsible for work with humans. I think that's where a lot of this will start to go.
Yeah, 100%. And that's actually what we're building into our automations in marketing. And Simon, our producer here and head of social, this is how we're thinking about it, is building out an org chart of the functions, identifying the functions within a process and what the people would be doing, and creating those agents to perform that. And it seems to be working really well. It works much better than trying to create one single, do it all prompt. But guys, we have so many questions here, and I want to keep the show moving, but I do want to get to two people that have been waiting patiently. So Shravan, welcome to the show. Let's get you in here, and then we'll get to Angana, and then we'll come back to the questions in a bit. But I appreciate your guys' patience. Shravan, how are you?
I'm good. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, this is a great talk. I'm learning a lot from this one. So, a couple of questions. Maybe first a comment on what Matt from PNC asked about testing. I feel when we are doing software development, it's all deterministic, right? So you 100% know what will happen when you do this. But with Gen AI or AI in the picture, it becomes probabilistic. That's why Micah's point of adding human in the loop, I think that's critical. So Copilot, if you're using automation anywhere, is very important on that. But in terms of the question I have, Mark, that you mentioned that you built a system for the AP team. So my question is, are you using your own LLMs or are you using like external vendors LLM? And then how you are making sure your data is secure when you're sending that outside your firewall?
Hi, Shravan, and thanks for the question. So it's a great point, and so some guidance I would provide on this one. I think I alluded before to there can be some analysis paralysis amongst in this subject, just because there's been such a proliferation of different vendors and models in this space. What I would say is that almost all of these use cases require no specific fine tuning beyond basic prompt engineering. So out of the gate, we were able to deliver use cases with a really high ROI based on models like GPT 3.5, GPT 4. In fact, we didn't even need 4 in many cases. That's the first thing. So in our 20 automations, there's only a handful of models that we're using, and we have not, although we're looking at some, we've not had to do any kind of extensive fine tuning. Again, back to this whole idea of time to market. One of the things that's been exciting for us is we haven't needed to do that. We've had a few very powerful use cases that needed to be grounded. I can talk about some of those in more detail, where we needed to ground them with our own enterprise data. But most of these didn't require extensive kind of fine tuning. But that's a really important question. Hopefully that helped.
Awesome. Let's get one more question, and I want to talk about a few more use cases, and then we'll come back. I know we've got, as I mentioned, some a bunch of hands up here. And Stephen, Therta, thank you for being patient. Ravi, Santosh as well. Give us a second, but let's bring Angana in really quick, and then we'll get to some more use cases. Angana, thank you for joining us. What's your question?
Yeah, hi. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. All right. So I actually wanted to go back to one of the discussions that we were just having about 6 to 8 weeks deployment times, right? From my experience, whenever non-tech firms, like let's say it's an educational firm or any other bank, tries to actually deploy Gen AI or any kind of cutting-edge solutions, unless they are just for POC, it generally takes a lot longer because of the infrastructure setup, and also any kind of inferences that we do for the results, they do need to be integrated, tested, right? So your 6 to 8 week timeline is for very specific, possibly POC or internal use cases that you just want to explore, especially, and what's your take on it?
Yeah, so no, those timelines are not just for POCs. These automations that we've delivered are delivering value for us. They are certainly internal. All of these use cases are to improve our internal processes. So when we talk about that kind of time, 6 weeks or 8 weeks, that's based on we've already assessed the idea. Whatever your terminology is for it, the requirements and all that intake portion of it are nailed down already. So I'm literally talking about kind of build and test and deploy time. And the other thing that you're referencing, which is something certainly we've seen even before generative AI, to your point, is all the kind of hoops that can come in terms of ensuring security and privacy and all these functions are satisfied with any new technology is super important. I guess my one point there would be internally, we really focused right out of the gate on that foundation. When I talk about foundation, that's exactly the stuff I'm talking about. We immediately established a good working relationship with our legal team to say, look, this is something that we want to do. It's important for us. We believe in it. Let's work together and see how to make it happen with the right guardrails, whether they be technology guardrails or policies that we put out for our workforce. We kind of wanted to make sure that we nailed that stuff down up front. What that means is that use case by use case, there's a relatively simple check that we need to do in terms of what type of data is involved and things like that. But all of the major checks we've already taken care of. So, for example, using, in our case, we use Azure instances. The secure Azure instances is a no-brainer for us. It's like absolutely, obviously, you're going to do that. We've also looked at some technologies. We're actually POCing some of them right now that are involved in doing things like masking data on the way in and then obviously unmasking on the way out of the LLM. We've had some situations that will require that. So my main point would be, if you can get through those foundational components up front, you can run real fast. You don't find yourself running up against the same thing use case by use case. But completely agree with your point. That's kind of how we've tried to address it.
I'd also say that no one here should be wearing a cone of shame if their use cases take longer than what Mark's team is able to crank out. Mark has been at this a long time. And like was mentioned, I think very appropriately, if you're working with very sensitive data, you're thinking about customer service related and customer facing kind of use cases, those will obviously take a bit longer when you especially think about the testing and validation that you want to do. I think what Mark mentioned very astutely towards the beginning of this is that if I can start with some low-hanging fruit, which I would say is low risk, relatively low complexity, and a medium or highest I can ROI, those are the things that I want to focus on. That's going to enable me to build a firm foundation for the way that we do generative AI deployments and implementations. And then that will make the future use cases easier. And I think that's what Mark was alluding to, is like, basically, we have to start with something. Let's start with something that's a little bit easier and isn't going to be a huge risk if a lot of it does go back to human processing.
For sure. And one other maybe important point I want to mention here, Micah, to that point is, we also this was really exciting for us. We also discovered that there were patterns here. In other words, so for example, we probably have 3 use cases that at a high level are doing exactly the same kind of high level process as that AP one. The idea of, we've got a bunch of different requests coming in for whatever the business function is, some kind of support function. What is it? And then either hand it to the humans or automate the response. Well, we've done that what I just described, we've done that in like 3 different business functions. Again, it's kind of a snowball effect. Once you've been through it once, those learnings really help accelerate the progress the next time.
In on the continuing on this thread, so you talked about the strong foundation, getting started with low-hanging fruit, and then sort of the lessons learned and the observations that some of which you just mentioned. But let's talk a little bit more about the use cases. So what are some of the maybe more medium complexity or complex type of use cases that you're addressing now?
Yeah, so once we were kind of through the what we call the quick wins or the first use cases, a few examples of some of the what I call kind of medium complexity. One that we handled with document automation, I know Mike was mentioning that earlier, was in the accounts receivable side, kind of on the billing side, which was essentially validation of customer invoices. So that was a process that again, we had some automation in that area, but with all these new capabilities, we were able to automate it to a much greater extent. So the idea there is, you've got some different documents involved in a process like that. Things like the customer PO and invoice and the information that's actually in the systems, but essentially what it amounts to is can you accurately extract information from some of these different documents, PDF documents, and then as soon as you've reconciled those and made sure that they're a match, you can actually post the invoice. So again, our latest version of document automation, it's like it was born for use cases like this. So that was one of the use cases we delivered that I would call kind of medium complexity. Another one that's been really popular has been helping with contract validation as part of the sales process. So if you think about a sales booking process, obviously the objective is, book the sale as quickly as possible. But a process like that typically is cross-functional. You got the sales team involved, you've got contract operations, you may have legal involved depending on the nature of the agreement with your customer. So this was a perfect example of we put Copilot right in Salesforce for our account executives. They can just click a validate button and it tells them, do they have the right agreements in place for whatever their quote is. And then generative AI kicks in and helps even with things like identifying the redlining in the agreements. That used to be a really, really time-consuming process for our contracts folks to try and identify what redlining might be present in the documents. It pulls out the redlining and identifies, which ones of those red lines might be more substantial. A customer's suggesting a change to a significant term of the agreement, for example.
That's amazing. And to your point earlier about just sort of like the fundamentals of the process, like something like that is an edit, right? So from my world, from creating content, it's like, now you know how to like find the red lines. For me, it'd be a similar thing. Like, what's the copy edit that we need to change based on some feedback that we got, right? But now you've got this foundational thing, and it's just like, okay, just switch it up for me.
Yes. Yeah.
Because in the end of the day, it's all about me. It's all about me. Let's not forget that. Even though Michael said he's the best.
all roads lead to Gabe. All roads.
Yes. Yeah.
I think the one thing again, it's this one was another great example of Copilot combined with generative AI. Again, there's I have an expression, you can't take a bad process and then just add it to Copilot and get a good process or a good automation. So in this case, the validation component of it, identifying things like the redlining and that was really, really powerful. Now, how can we make that as frictionless as possible? How can we serve that up to our business users? Well, that's what Copilot was born for. There's no swiveling their chair or looking to a different system. It's just sitting on the screen, press the validate button. So from an adoption standpoint, that was really, really a game changer to make sure that our sales team could easily consume it.
I think that's a really interesting point, by the way, too, is just the usability for people like me who aren't maybe, in the weeds on the automation side or from the technology side, just in general. It's like we've got things, we've got an output we're looking for. We need some easy interface to enhance and improve the thing that we want to do. This conversation, we've got like 5 minutes left in this conversation. Like, I feel like we could go for an hour, 2 hours more. I think what we need to do is have part 2, and we can go even further into this. But before we do that, and you guys can comment in the event here, let us know what you want to cover. We'll do this again, no problem. I mean, it's hard to get a hold of Mark and Micah because they are so popular and busy, but I'll do my best to wrangle them and we can come back to this. So let us know in the comments what else you want to cover, what else you want to hear from these guys. We can come prepared. But before we do that, I want to get to a couple more questions, guys. Therta has been waiting for a while here patiently, and I appreciate you, Therta, for doing so. Let's see if we can get Therta in here to ask, see what's on his mind. When there's our pregnant pauses, we wait for the technology to work.
We'll do an intro for Therta. Therta is an Automation Anywhere MVP for multiple years running. Here he is.
Thank you, Micah. Thank you, Gabriel, for opportunity. See, my question is in continuation to Angana. So I'm entrepreneur, same lines, because currently I'm working for some customers where they have some resistance to use GenAI, thinking of a security in place. We have a lot of use cases around support projects where tickets are flowing in. We can do some sort of we can push the ticket to GenAI and get the context, or content. We push the content and get the context of the thing and assign to right teams for quicker actions. But we usually get, I mean, this is the kind of a question, right? In terms of banking, insurance, or wherever the customer data is involved, people are a bit resistant. How to tackle this?
Yeah, I think ticket handling is a good first use case. I think I would start to look at some of the easier tickets that we could handle and maybe even completely automate the response to. Not every single ticket that you see. I mean, it sounds like you're working with a financial institution. Not every single ticket that comes in for that financial institution is going to be related to sensitive data. So you might do your first scan to understand if this contains any sensitive data. Usually, form fillers will recommend people not put their social security number and other sensitive details into a form when submitting a ticket. But let's say they have a problem with the website, and that problem is addressed through the FAQ. That's an opportunity for you to automatically respond to that ticket because it's a relatively easy one and give that person a first response. That enables you to deflect some ticket from support. And that also enables you to move forward with a pretty quick response for that customer. For those that are more sensitive, just like we talked about before, the way that I think about it is to ease myself into this, right? How do I start to take on some of the lower hanging fruit tickets that are less sensitive? But the whole time I'm going to be trying to scan that incoming ticket. And again, I don't know all the details of the format of how they're coming in, but I'm assuming it's some kind of form fill. And then I probably already know who the person is who submitted it because they've logged in before they filled that form. So based on some of that detail, I'm going to try to route these intelligently. So I'm going to understand, hey, is this a high net worth individual? Is this someone who has a history of complaints with our organization? Like, those are the kind of things I'm going to look to as I start to route and sort some of these. And then I'm going to also look at the content of what they've submitted to determine, is this something that we can quickly address automatically? Does this need to be escalated to an actual user? Mark, I know you guys have done some work with at least testing. I don't want to speak on your behalf, but I know you've done some work with automating responses to questions and things like that, even with a tool that we use internally here. Talk some about how you got started with that and how you're approaching this same scenario.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a loaded topic, but we do have a pretty powerful use case. It may have to be discussed in our part 2 of this, just because of the time it'll take. But
I feel like there's a cliffhanger here, guys. Like, we're just like tune in next week.
No, I mean, Micah, that one for sure is very heavily grounded for sure, to make sure that it's responding based on the best we have in terms of our own knowledge bases. Some of that data is public, some of it's private in this case. So it's definitely heavily grounded. But generative AI is pretty good also at saying, again, here are the situations you're allowed to respond to this type of stuff. But if you're not sure, don't stretch out of your lane. And in those situations, hand it to a human. That we've certainly done that in that use case, not just based on sentiment, but based on we're not totally sure what you're asking. So hand it to a human instead of stretching and trying to do something with it.
So that's a good teaser. We'll dive into that one a little bit deeper in a next episode.
I'm really tempted, guys. We're at the top of the hour, but I have to do this. I'm really tempted to do like the Jimmy Kimmel, thing with Matt Damon here, as an ongoing joke. But let's bring in Steven. I almost want to turn that into a whole nother joke, but I'll explain that later on the next episode as well. Steven, do we have a mic that's working? Are you able to join us?
DJ G-Shock, what's up, man?
Look at that. He's right in.
There he is.
Just calling in, wish you guys a happy New Year's, because Micah hates New Year, so
That's the takeaway from today's event.
Yes. So I was going to give you a freebie with the demo royale, but you already conquered that one. So, trying to think of a creative question for you guys. And I've extensively read your guys' solution pattern modeling framework, trying to see if I could come up with any unconventional or creative patterns. So I was wondering if maybe you have done this pattern. So have you ever done a document automation-based human-in-the-loop training use case where you combine it with an unattended document automation that points to the same learning instance? So your human-in-the-loop trains your unattended-based automation?
Steven, that's a great question. Nothing's popping to mind immediately, but I see where you're going with that. I'm going to note that one down. That's an interesting one. I don't think I've got a readily available example of that. I know what you're asking. That's a cool.
Yeah, for background for everyone else, the solution pattern modeling framework is basically our thought of how can you start to categorize the types of automations that you're creating. So some might be running off schedule, some might be triggered by APIs, some might start with a Copilot human form where someone kicks off this request or an email coming in or things like that. And so Stephen's asking for some of these more esoteric patterns, and have we done any of those? I super geek out on the document automation solution patterns. And Stephen, I know we're going to talk about this later today. The way that I think about this is in a multi-step process where we need to get the images in, we need to classify them, we need to provide a mechanism for being able to correct and perfect that classification, which will inform the way that we do classification better in the future. Because based on that classification, then we move to an extraction step where we attempt to extract data from the form based on knowing what it is, right? So we have to know what it is so we know what we can and should extract. I think what Stephen's asking is, are we able to train our model just based on a human starting to do the extraction and enter that data? I think it's an interesting use case. The way that I would look at doing this is I'm going to take a multi-step approach to the way that I extract document data. I'm going to first, if it's a structured or semi-structured form, try to use document automation as is, sans Gen AI, because it actually does a pretty good job of extracting that data. I'm going to check to make sure I got what I needed. If I did not, that's when I'm going to look to using maybe another instance of document automation with generative AI so that I can try to extract that data that I may have missed using a slightly different approach. And then if I still am having fields or data that is in doubt, or I haven't been able to automatically validate, that's when I'm going to show that to a human. In between those steps of automated extraction, I'm also going to see what information I have to possibly triangulate what the response is that I'm not getting. So let's say that it's a person's social security number, but I have their first name, their address, and maybe their, customer ID or some other information. I might be able to look up the data that I'm missing and try to even suggest that for a human. So their role is just to visually verify the results, not necessarily having to type it all in or do rubber band indexing to grab it off of a field. So that's how I think about like the most robust, most mature use of some of these document extraction capabilities. But we could probably do a whole session just on document automation at some point.
I want to thank Stephen for jumping in and lobbing in that softball for you at the end of the show. Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah, he hooked me up there.
No, but I think that feedback loop and that sort of that training thing, that's something, just zooming out a little bit, just thinking about the training side, is super interesting. And again, in the one of the use cases that I'm working on, there's kind of that in a different sort of way, but there's that modality that we're implementing. So also super fascinated by it. We're past the top of the hour. That has flown by. I think the consensus is likely that we should probably do another one, a part 2, like any great, movie franchise, Rocky,
Yeah.
The Avengers,
The
Godfather.
We all know the sequels are always awesome, right? So what could go wrong?
Always better. Die Hard, Die Harder. So we'll get that on the schedule, guys. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Just tons of great questions. Sorry to those of you that we couldn't get in, but do join the next show. Do comment here on what you want to hear specifically. We'll bring some more heat to the table. As Stephen has anointed me, this is DJ G-Shock signing off. Micah, Mark, thank you so much. Per usual, great conversation. Three Amigos back in action. Appreciate you guys. Thank you, Micah.
Cue the outro music.
Oh yeah. Are you using it on your phone right now?
No, I don't
Mark,
I put it away. We're gonna have some next time.
It's coming for
next time.
Like we said, the sequel's always better. There'll be music. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Micah. Thanks,
Mark. Great job, man. Thank you.